One of the frustrating parts about growing up with a lot of isolation and lack of social interaction in general, let alone that the majority of the social interaction that I got was pretty negative. I had to grow up and understand as I was growing up that I had a real issue with not knowing how to communicate well. I don't mean I can't speak English well to people who also speak English. I mean either not saying enough and not knowing where that line is, where the person's still asking for more information and you don't know how much to say because you don't want to make people uncomfortable. Your life makes people uncomfortable. The way that you grew up, the way that you have experienced the world, the kinds of things that you have been through make people uncomfortable. So you try really hard to keep subject matter surface level and to keep information comfortable, to stick to the topic or to ask them about themselves and not really talk a lot about yourself. And you get kind of used to that. And so then when someone does seem to show an interest in you, not even necessarily in like a romantic way, but just maybe wants to get to know you more as a person, wants to become maybe like a friend or something, then it can be really hard not to overshare and to say too much. And oversharing has been this thing that just sort of happens like once or twice in a relationship that I have with someone if I get close to them at all. And it's not meant to be like this gurgitation of information, but it sometimes can come across that way and push people away. The problem is there's been a lot in my life and it can be very overwhelming to another person. It can be too much. Even if you're saying it in a really nice way, you know, hey, thank you for helping me, it can be a lot. And so then they feel pressure from how heavy of information you gave them to respond in some sort of kind or mutually heavy way. And if a person is fiercely independent, that can be really hard for them. They can pull right away from you. Sometimes people have a tendency to overshare if they grow up in a really bad way, not because they necessarily are trying to be manipulative or anything, but because they just don't know where that threshold is or how to tell where socially it would be acceptable and then where socially it wouldn't be. And so it can be absolutely a thing to watch out for in a person, but a lot of times when someone overshares, it's not that they're trying to do something necessarily bad. Having experienced love bombing, I can definitely tell the difference now that I've experienced it between actual full-blown love bombing and someone just oversharing with me. And when I overshare, because my life just has a lot in it, at this point in my life, I try very hard to add a disclaimer. I don't expect anything now that you have this information. No pressure. We don't have to be friends anymore at all. I just wanted you to understand. It can help, but sometimes it's still not enough. In reality, sometimes things are just too much for people to handle. My life has given people nightmares before. It was just from me describing things that actually happened to me, and I had to really absorb that. Now, there has been a couple of times in my life where I avoided saying anything about myself at all because I was pretty sure that if a person sensed that kind of vulnerability or weakness in me, that they would walk away. And I was right. There are a lot of times that you going through a lot and them finding out about it makes the whole way they see you change to where they can only pity you. They can only look down at you. They start to talk to you like they're patting a dog on the head. And they don't necessarily mean to be dismissive or oblivious when they're doing that. They're not trying to be harsh. They just can't see you as an adult person anymore. They see you as the injured child that you once were. And maybe that injured child is still in there somewhere, but you are different than that injured child. but they can't see anything but the pain. They can't see anything but that. And so you learn to slowly recognize there's certain people that are that way. For me, it's a lot of men. A lot of guys in general really struggle to make friends with me, not because we can't hang out or something, but because at a certain point, they just sort of can smell it on me or something that I've been abused. And that sense of fragility is very uncomfortable. For women, there's a lot of women who want me to overshare. It's almost like they want to create a more quick path to a relationship, or they want to create a false sense of intimacy and encourage me to overshare. But I also have been taken advantage of a lot by women in my life. And it's probably just A, I'm really bad at choosing relationships, and B, I had a very abusive mother, and I'm sure some of that translates into how relationships form for me. But it seems like the more independent someone is, or the more that they value strength, the more that they value being your own person, the more they want you to keep everything to yourself. And the more that someone is coming to you and they're maybe looking for a caretaker, they're looking for someone to be that nurturing person and that safe space for them, the more that they want you to overshare, because they want to get you to do that so that it gives them permission to emotionally dump on you. They feel like it's allowed because you did it too. So red flags turn into green flags. It is interesting to me, the older I get, the more I really just truly recognize that this is probably just going to always be a lifelong issue. That I will always struggle with knowing what to tell people when, and that in reality, I don't know if I will ever meet someone I can just literally tell everything or anything. That I'm just somehow gonna have to be okay with that. There have been situations where I could talk more freely with certain people, but it is extremely rare. I will say, if you are a person who tends to struggle with oversharing, please don't share personal information that can get you harmed. Don't share your address to a person who doesn't know it. Don't share your financial accounts. Don't share how much money you've got. Don't share things that people can use really easily. It's bad enough when you tell someone something super vulnerable from your life, a moment that was just raw for you, and they disregard it, or they pull away from you and decide not to be your friend after all. Like, that's painful enough. Don't give them the ammunition to do actual physical or realistic harm to you. It's hard enough just the emotional pain. Also, I tend to lean like 75% of the time toward the direction of not sharing, of keeping things more surface level. And maybe that's not exactly correct, but I've been burned enough times by being too much that that's just the easier thing to do. I definitely have my trust issues. I guess that's my way of expressing them. Sometimes someone comes along and they really impact you, and they really are an influential person. Change your life. Change the way you think about your life. And you dare to tell them that. You dare to say, thank you. And because I want you to understand why I'm thanking you, here's what's going on behind that thank you. Here's why you were so impactful. My childhood had this in it. I grew up with this in it. My relationships were like this. Whatever it is, you say something. Even when you do that, even when it's probably too much information, but you need them to understand where you're coming from, don't give every detail. Yeah, I was abused almost daily. Don't describe in detail what the abuse was. Say, hey, I got beat. Don't describe in detail what that looked like. Say, hey, I've been in life or death situations. You don't have to explain in detail what kind of near-death situation it was. give enough to substantiate your thank you or your gratitude or, hey, this is why you were impactful to me, without giving every detail, because it's a lot. It can be overwhelming for people to feel the pressure to care when they don't actually care. And especially when someone has influenced you in maybe a life coach or mentorship or teacher kind of way, they're not looking to have a long-term relationship with you. They're looking to temporarily influence your life. And sometimes when you grow up with a lack of unconditional love, you can overly attach to people who are only meant to be there temporarily. So make it really clear to them that you don't expect anything further. You just want to fully express how grateful you are for what they've done thus far. I can't say enough, if you're concerned about blurting out too much information, write it down. Even if you don't feel like you're a good writer, that's not really the point. The point is to figure out what you want to say and what you don't want to say. If you've written out a bunch of words, you can edit it. You can say, oh wow, now that I'm rereading what I just wrote, that might be a little much, or I might need to rephrase that. Write it out so that you can feel more confident about what you're doing. You can feel more like you are offering the words that you would like to offer instead of just gurgitating some big emotional moment. Also, writing it down gives you a chance to not say it right that second and to go ahead and take a few minutes to let some of the emotional rise come down a little bit. And it could be every single time you reread it, you cry. It could be every single time that you look at the bulk of words that you want to pour out, that it is emotional. It is gut-wrenching. It is raw. It is a lot. And there's no way around that. It's going to be oversharing. There's no way around it. Sometimes that happens. But if you at least write it down, you can at least try to narrow in on what you're trying to say instead of a bunch of tangents. And you can try to curb too many exact details, and you can get to the point that you're trying to get to. Because in the long run, that's what's going to make you feel the better. That's what's going to give you closure. That's what's going to really establish whether this relationship is going anywhere or not going anywhere. No matter what kind of relationship it is. People who are like me and grow up without that kind of love or nurturing to misunderstand when someone shows attention. Attention does not equal intention. And that can be really hard to accept. And sometimes you need to accept that that's true of your own feelings. That you're giving a ton of attention to a person and you don't know what your intention is. You just feel so much. So please write it down first. Figure out what your intention is first. Don't just explode in a big emotional gurgitation onto this person. Because A, you could really mess up the relationship, and B, you could really put yourself in a vulnerable place that you don't feel comfortable being in. You didn't even want to necessarily end up. Have enough respect for yourself and for the other person to not just gush outward. I probably could edit more, even when you do feel the necessity to overshare. Because sometimes we just have big feelings, and until we express them, they're not going away. So there's a line that you got to find, and it's a hard line to find. Somewhere there's compromising for what's socially acceptable and compromising what would make the other person feel more comfortable, and compromising yourself.